All right, peace, brothers and sisters. We're going to illuminate a particular topic today, and we're going to be talking about the Moorish presence in Britain. So let's jump right into this message. But England is an island populated in nearly 50 million inhabitants, of which the majority, indeed, the ruling majority, is white or Caucasian and purely European stock. The images that they put out in history and in the books are all European images of blue noses, blonde hair, English rose, fair maiden of old, the blue-eyed boy of more modern chronology, images akin to modern Northern Europe. But however, behind the Scandinavian, the Greekish, the Romanticism, we have a population overwhelming consistent of a brown-eyed, dark-haired inhabitants. And in this lecture, this brief lecture, my aim is to just illuminate the politically charged imagery and its use in culturing how this population idolizes its racial origin family. The study of English history reveals ways of colonizers and immigrants, whether this is through the Romans, the Vikings, the Germanic tribes, the Normans, and etc. They all depicted as white Caucasians, and at the least in modern times, able to be categorized as being of European stock. But however, family, what seemingly does not find its way into the print is an African presence all through Britain, all through England. That is not until the late 1500s with the beginning of the slave trade where the Africans are recorded as blackamoor pets, domestic servants, soldiers, and entertainers. But see, we have books, the research, Ancient and Modern Britons by David Ritchie, volume 1 and 2. Also research the Anglo-Saxon race by Thomas William Shore. And in chapter 7, it's talk about the darker forefathers on page 103 to 120. Also research the Scandinavian relations with Ireland during the Viking period by A. Walsh in 1922. You also want to research the Viking world, where it shows you who we are. The Celtics, all black. You see how they connotate the pictures? That's why I say they get you with symbology. For you won't look at the pictures. And for you won't research the wisdom. St. Mark and Vasilisa. Watch this. Porphyry sculpture originating from Constantinople, the Tirax, or the Moors, the 4th century Egyptian art. When I say we were everywhere, Egyptian art. So you just have to connect the dots, family. On a closer examination of the history of the island, we find inconsistencies and various omissions. History is supposed to be a linear story of facts, the facts of what has gone before us. Therefore, if we were to walk back and reside with at least some of the indigenous population of the island, we find evidence of a people diametrically opposed to those who claim current ownership of the land, namely Moorish people from African descent. And over a period of 2,000 years, amongst evidence are burial mounds where skeletal remains lying in photo positions in admiration of the womb of the Mother Earth and facing to the east, run parallel with the ancient African or the ancient Moorish custom of veneration of the sun, the rising of the east, and elevation of the immortal soul. We have the discovery of numerous skulls with their sizes and shapes clearly denotes an African phenotype and origin. So we have to know these things. Older texts of folklore of English, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales often mention the arrival of Africans and a distinct African presence, a distinct Moorish presence, not solely as visitors or slaves, but as the original inhabitants. We find the earliest races to inhabit the Isles were short, Swarthy, black, dark hair, dark eye, and long skull. Its language belonged to the class called Hamitic and seemed to have originally come from some part of either Eastern, Northern, or Central Africa. This is a quote omitted from the history books and hidden because all academia is pseudo westernized perspective. It's just flat out. But the notion abounds that English history begins with the arrival of the Celts. However, the Celts, whose racial origin cannot or has not been truthfully qualified outside the parameters that supported a Caucasian supremacist myth, had gods of a non Aryan origin. Writings of Tacitus, the first century historians, the Roman historian, mentioned the dark complexion of the Silures, the Silures, or the Black Celts, and maintained that a black aboriginal race lived side by side with a white one in the British Isles in pre-Roman times. To give volume to the consciousness of a silence stemming from the modern written word, since the original African presence, there has been countless migrations from the African continent for the purpose of conquest as explorers and colonists. Pliny, the Roman historian, who first saw the Britons in the 2nd century AD, describes their complexion as Ethiopian under the African emperor Septimus Severus, Septimus Severis, along with a large contingent of Roman soldiers, including African soldiers and officials. We have the Roman occupation of England. Those who Server fought were known as the Mate, or the marsh dwellers. They were Caledoni nicknamed Picti, known as Moors or black men. The early Scots too, whose name is claimed is derived from Scotty, a English princess, or Scotti, Scotia. They make their first appearance in history in connection with the Picts in 360 AD, when they began a series of incursions into the Roman province of Briton. These two nations are invariably linked in all records of the Roman conquest, with the chief Roman historian regarding them as Achaean in blood. Though associated primarily to the north and to the landmass later known as Scotland, evidence of their presence is amongst other places to be found in Norfolk and Cornwall. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Africans populated the whole island, but what I'm saying that indigenous people populated the island, and from this point onwards, it's undoubtedly that we were there all through history. And I write this to strike a balance to include what has been excluded and to permit what has been omitted from history. Like I showed you the books. I'm sorry, they dropped. Hold on. You can find certain history in David MacRitchie, The Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2. He states that the Moors dominated Scotland as late as the times of the Saxons and as late as the 10th century. Provinces in Scotland were wholly black. The 700-year domination over the Iberian Peninsula and southern France by the Moors, their bringing and transmission of civilization to various parts of Europe, undeniably results in Moorish influence and inhabitation in England. Again, places, names, and localities are repleted with Moorish names, legacies, and origins. Successive conquests by the Vikings, the Angles, the Saxons, the Danes, the Normans, etc., consistently thread through the story of the English and should need no further mention here apart from the omission with regard to historical facts of their racial composition. And it's a quote by author Gwen Jones, is that the Vikings were not of the pure Nordic race. Within this, we have black Norsemen mentioned in the sagas like Thorstein the Black and other Africans like Thornhall the Hunter, a Viking who was the mentor and closest companion of Eric the Red, a seafarer who chartered uncharted territory, described as a large man, strong and black, and like a giant, Based on this and beyond a racist ideology, it is beyond every stretch of the imagination to believe that some of the Viking conquerors of England were Moorish, were African descent. Among the Danes, too, is a noted black president. A noted black presence, Geoffrey of Monmouth described in detail the invasion of Britain by the Saxons and the involvement of Africans in the struggle between the British and the Anglo-Saxons. With a Saxon stronghold on the east of the island, the ruler of Britain, Cerdic, was unable to quash a Saxon revolt, and the Saxons, according to Monmouth, sent for Goman, the African Moor. The then ruler of Ireland, faced with Gorman and the 160,000 African Moors fleet that Gorman led into Britain, Cerdic was forced to seek refuge and subsequently forced to flee. Among other races, Moorish mercenaries were acquired by the Normans to assist the Norman conquest, and as previously stated earlier, the 700-year Moorish domination on the Iberian Peninsula and southern France should at least permit the possibility of African Moorish genealogy within the Normans. Therefore, from the 6th to the 12th century, with the arrival of the Germanics, the Normans, and various other tribes over this period, we have the demise of the original Britons and any other evidence of the indigenous people who were not of the proposed Aryan race. Just like if you follow my YouTube page, how I did the history on the Holocaust of the Tasmanian, how the Europeans destroyed them all, same thing, subjugated and driven to existence by the eventual conquerors, or due to this influence, we have intermixing of these races until this evidence is eventually almost bred out. An image used as a political tool from the 16th century onward, a time when the African presence is once again prevalent, notably through the Atlantic slave trade, in order to justify the social, the cultural, and the economic exploitation of a people to uphold a notion of racial superiority. But the propound ideology of English history is a falsification of history. It's pseudo, one that negates the swaths of people, the monument of people, the Moorish legacy, who, if not were here first, at least form part of the early presence here. You can't exclude our presence, and people who, through migration, warfare, and general movement across the land, along with the inevitable infusion of blood and genealogy, are part of its makeup. It's countless other facts documenting the Moorish presence, the African descent on this island and throughout its history. However, to discover them, it appears that one has to look deeper and search further seriously, narrowing the answer as to what threat or challenge to history does inclusion and serious discussion on this information possess. So with some books I want to challenge all my brothers and sisters to read. David Mack Ritchie, The Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2. Ahmad Ali, Abraham Ali, The Black Celts and the Ancient African Civilization in Ireland and Britain. Ivan van Sertima, African Presence in Early Europe. J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Color Line. Gerald Massey, and Ancient Egypt, Light of the World. Depending on the reprints, it might be 2 volumes. And I also want you to research, family, Anglo-Saxon Race by Thomas William Shore. Chapter 7 is The Darker Forefathers. Scandinavian Relations with Ireland during the Viking period by A. Wash in 1922. I'm just here to reveal all spookism. I'm not here to promote no religious dogma. I'm a Moor, a master navigator, Sufism, Theosophist, alchemist. We must get into the truth and to knowing things. I love you all. Love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, health, and wealth. Shalom Alakim, Aya Asha Aya, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.